Lately, I've been thinking a lot about fear and its role in our lives. And as I researched it more and more, I realized that while fear itself can be helpful, we aren't always using it correctly. In fact, as I dug deeper into my own relationship with fear, I realized that by making this simple change, I could transform my life. Fear has the power to keep us in relationships, block us from work opportunities, and drive our daily decisions. It's easy to blame external factors for our problems, but challenging our fears can be more transformative since we can't change external factors, right? We can't change someone else, unfortunately. Fear debilitates us from living a free and peaceful life, which is why today I'm going to talk about what fear actually is, common fears and how they block us, how fear masks itself, how fear can hurt us, and most importantly, how to rid fear from your life. Stick around because you're going to want to hear that one. Let's start by defining fear. Now, fear in and of itself is really just an unpleasant or uncomfortable feeling that accompanies the concern that something might be dangerous or threatening, right? That's what a fear is. It often sends us into fight, flight, or freeze because we worry for our own safety. But when we often think of fear, we think of fear of simple things, like a fear of spiders or a fear of scary movies. But what I want to talk about today isn't those simple things. I want to talk about deeper rooted fears. Fears that are shaped by our life experiences. Fears that come from society or external factors. And when we talk about these deeper rooted fears, the ones that I see coming up time and time again, or what I would call the most common, are the fear of not being good enough, of being abandoned, being alone, failing, financial insecurity, just to name a few. And I want to give you some examples of what these fears can look like. Because sure, we can say like, yeah, I think I struggle with the fear of not being good enough. But what does that actually look like in real life? How do I know if I'm really struggling with it? Now, if we have that fear of not being good enough, it can play out in many ways. Number one, we can be people pleasers, right? If we don't think we're good enough, we want to do our best to ensure people like us, maybe at all costs, at the cost of our own, self. We could also use other people. If we never think we're good enough, we can just feel like it's never going to amount to anything. They're never going to like me. What does it matter? Can go in the other direction. We'll do a lot of different things in order to be validated or accepted, or we can completely swing and just push the people away. It's almost like that avoidant attachment where out of our fear that we're never going to be good enough, we can just almost like give up, like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Who cares what people think? I'm going to act in any way that I want, almost just to like buck the trend, right? So it can kind of go in either way. We can also use social media to achieve value, to battle against that fear. I see that a lot in what I do with other creators, right? If we always worry that we're not good enough, an easy way to look is to look at your analytics online and see how well it's resonating. And if it's not, it can be really painful for those of us who have that deeply rooted fear. We can also chase external factors, right? We can want a lot of material possessions or accolades. And those things don't even have to align with our core values. And this is one of the things I want you to think about as we go through these, is that there's the discomfort that comes with acting out of these fears. I think even for myself, as I've been journaling about this and thinking about this, we often think like, well, if you're afraid of something, and you can do something to make the fear kind of assuaged or go down, then that would be good, right? But no, this often comes at the cost of our own well-being. So we're chasing certain things. We want these accolades. Maybe we want to buy a bunch of fancy clothes or a fancy house or have a certain car or whatever. But that's not really how we truly are. Instead, we're more obsessed with how other people view us. And that becomes the most important thing. It's complete abandonment of self. We're placing other people above our own. And that is never going to be a healthy thing. So even though it can feel like we're doing it to make the fear go away, it causes a bunch of other issues. The next fear I want to talk about and offer some examples for is the fear of being abandoned or alone. That's incredibly common, especially for any of you out there who struggle with BPD-like symptoms or have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And so what we can do as a result of this fear is we can settle in our relationships. We can find ourselves getting married to or dating for a very long time people who aren't good for us or aren't actually someone that we love or want to be with. It's someone that maybe we just feel like, well, at least they chose me. That's it. We don't feel like we get to choose someone else. We just choose to not be abandoned. It can also mean that we maintain friendships that maybe don't add any value to our lives. Now, I'm not saying that every friendship has to be perfect. People have to give and give and give to us. But friendships and relationships in general should be breath in. It should feel fulfilling and good. We should feel better having spent time with those people. If not, maybe it's deeply rooted in this fear of abandonment. We can also be a people pleaser if we fear this as well, because we're afraid to upset people because they might leave us. So we'll do everything we can. We can feel like we're walking on eggshells to please them so that they don't leave. Moving on to fear of failure. This one's also incredibly common in our community. We can settle in our careers despite lacking passion, meaning we just find ourselves in this one role and we're so afraid that we're going to mess it up or that they're going to realize we don't even know what we're doing, that we don't even strive for what we truly want to do. Maybe we find ourselves in a career path we don't even like, that's not fulfilling, but we're too afraid to quit. What if I went to school forever and it turns out I don't actually like that thing? Right? I worried about that. I actually took a break between undergrad and grad school to figure out if I even liked psychology in a real way. If I actually applied it to a job, would that job be fulfilling? Now, luckily for me, the answer was yes. But what if it's not? We can be afraid that that looks like failure, that means that we couldn't hack it, right? Or what if we spend a couple of years in a career path? Like, let's say we spend our whole life thinking we want to be a lawyer or a doctor, and then we're finally doing that and we don't like it. We can end up settling because we're afraid of looking like a failure or feeling like we failed. And so we won't take any life risks, won't try new things that we like also. So it gets out of career and it gets into life, right? We can block our gut feelings and make decisions based on things that we know we can do and we will succeed at. I actually saw this meme the other day that really spoke to me. And it was essentially saying that if we were told we were gifted from a young age, because I actually got tested for the gifted program, I didn't get into it. But I had a lot of friends that were in it. And I was a high achiever, right? In school, you know me, people pleaser, type A, perfectionist. It's all tied into these fears, right? But this meme anyway said that if you were told you were gifted or tested for the gifted program, and then that means that you potentially quit things as you get older when you're not good at them for fear of looking like a failure because you think you're supposed to always be gifted at everything. Now I'm butchering it. It was probably much more succinct than that, but it's really true. Sometimes when we fear failure because we're told that we're supposed to be the best and we're supposed to, never be bad, we're supposed to do all these things, then it can be really hard for us to admit when we're not good at something or we don't like something and to stop. Now, fear has shown up for me a lot in my life. I think that's why it's been on my mind lately, because of a couple pieces. I have been afraid of failure a lot. You guys know I'm like super type A, high achiever. I also have feared being abandoned. But I think the one that shows up the most for me is feeling like I'm not worth it. I'm not enough. That fear is deeply embedded in a huge piece of my life. Number one, and I've talked candidly about this with you guys in the past, but it has created a people pleaser piece of me, a huge part of who I am. Like I say sorry when I shouldn't. I will double book myself, overwhelm myself, not say no when I should say no. I struggle with boundaries because I feel like I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. I essentially light myself on fire to keep others warm sometimes. And it's been a battle because like I talked about in another video, I always felt like I have to hustle for my worth. And I learned through my own therapy and my own journaling process. My journaling is life-changing. I'm telling you, give it a try. Part of it, it's never all of it, but a huge piece of the pie, I think, has to do with the fact that Dad worked away from home a lot. And he was, providing for the family, thank you. And as an adult, I understand that. But as a child, it felt like there was a scarcity of attention from my dad. And so in order to get that attention and to get that need met, to feel like I was enough and I was important, I felt like I had to fight for it. And so that created this people-pleasing type A, kind of high intensity, 100% all the time type of person. I mean, in many ways it served me well, right? Again, you can say like there are positives and negatives to it. The positives were that like I did really well in school and I competed as intensely as I could at all the sports. And I like when I was in band, I wanted to be first chair. And when I was in choir, I wanted to get the solo. Like I've always pushed to do the most that I can do. And it's allowed me to have an intense capacity for work and be like quite the workhorse. But huge detriment to my relationships. And it took me forever to realize that I had cultivated relationships with friendships and even boyfriends throughout my life that were uneven. And I'm not saying that every relationship should be fully balanced, but like I was the only one doing the giving and I was making sure that they were always happy at my own detriment and at the cost of my own self, never feeling like they aligned with who I really wanted to be or who I'd like to be associated with. I just did because I felt like I wasn't enough. I felt like I had to earn it. They were enough just being them, but not for me, right? It's this double standard. I think that might be one of the biggest confusions for people who maybe don't struggle with this. It doesn't mean that I think other people aren't worth it and they need to please me. It's only me. It's like two sets of rules. And that applies to so much of our life, but it's like a key indicator, just like a note. Tip number one, I guess, is that if you recognize that you hold yourself to a different set of rules than you hold other people to in the exact same scenario, that's a little red flag. That's something we should be curious about because that's really helped me recognize when I'm doing something that's out of one of these fears or an old story that I don't need to keep repeating. So just put that in your brain for future thought and maybe journaling, that if you have different sets of rules for yourself and others in the exact same scenario, might be worth looking into. Okay, I could talk about this forever, but I want to keep moving on. Let's talk about how fear masks itself, because fear often looks like something else, right? It can pretend to be things like resentment, frustration, or the ick, getting the ick feelings. Now, examples of this is like traffic. Super frustrating, right? We can be really agitated. Oh, trust me, I lived in LA for 20 years. I can get really frustrated at traffic. Now, that could equate to our fear of not being in control of a situation. I know personally when I would get super, super stressed out in traffic, it was definitely fear-based because I would hate to be late because that would put somebody else out. Hence, I'm not people-pleasing, right? Like tracking these things back is going to be like, or at least it was for me. So think about these. Another fear of being late, like I said, not being liked or being able to control how people perceive you, right? They think that you're rude. Another example, feeling overwhelmed at work. If we think work is just really stressful and overwhelming, it could be a feeling as a result of a deep fear of not being able to succeed. Again, that fear of failure or not accomplishing everything and thus being seen by your boss and others as incompetent or not good enough. Do you see how it can always track back to these deeply rooted fears? It could also, like I gave this example a little bit earlier, but it could show up in us staying in friendships or relationships that no longer add value out of fear that we might be alone or not liked. Now let's move into, and I'm sure you can already see some of the signs, but how fear can hurt us. It took me a while to come around to this. It's true that fear hurts us because it can be selfish. We aren't showing up authentically in our relationships, right? We're making decisions because we're self-seeking and trying to challenge those fears or assuage those fears, right? So we're not actually being ourselves and being authentic. The relationships that we have could all be based on fear and not out of true joy or love or any of the important things in a relationship. Fear can also cause us to obsess. We obsess over the email that we sent. I know, I do it too. Or a friend who is upset with us. I've done that as well. I've also stayed awake at night thinking like, oh, I don't know why. What if she's mad? What if I said something? What if, even just because they haven't texted me back and it has nothing to do with me. Their life is busy, but I will assume that it means that they're mad at me, or I'll look for reasons that they might be mad at me. And I can obsess about this. And it's all because of my fear of not being good enough. It makes me want to cry even just thinking about all the wasted hours and energy obsessing. We can also obsess if we worry about like financial insecurity. We can worry that we're not going to be able to pay our mortgage. All in all, it strips us of our time. It causes distress and it can take away our sleep. It can also cause us to resent people. I talked about this in relation to burnout. Like if we are burnt out, one of the key indicators of it is you start to resent the people who you're doing something for. This could be work or this could be personal. And I think it's because we aren't doing it out of joy, right? It's out of fear, it's out of stress, it's out of upset. We're doing it because we feel like we have to and we don't have a choice. That's kind of the kicker with fear, is that it makes us feel like we don't have a choice. This is another tip or something to journal about. Tip number 2 is that if we find ourselves resenting and getting agitated at the sheer ask or request of our time or energy for something, that's a good indication that there's something else going on, right? It's another red flag. It could mean, in this case, it could mean it's because we're acting out of a fear of financial insecurity, fear of failure, fear of abandonment, fear of not being good enough, or we could be not taking care of ourselves and burnt out, maybe because of the fear of failure, I don't know. But it's just something to acknowledge. So if you pay attention to this and you feel like you're resentful and agitated, irritated all the time, something to be curious, not judgmental about. Could be coming from a deeply rooted fear. So I have an exercise I want you to do. I want you to write these questions down and I want you to consider them, hopefully in your journal. Because I'm telling you, try it for 2 weeks, at least 3 to 4 days a week, and tell me you don't feel better, okay? That's my challenge. But the exercise I want you to do is to consider these questions. What would life look like if you were without fear? How do you think things would change? If you had no fear of failure, or if you didn't fear not being liked, if you didn't fear being seen or perceived as lesser than, what would your life look like? What would your career be like? Would you be doing what you're doing? Would you be living where you're living? Would your friendships look the same? And what would your day-to-day life look like? Think about it. We never take time to really consider, but it helps sometimes if you imagine. It's almost like solution-focused therapy, right? If the solution was here, if there was no fear, how would we know? How would your life be different? And finally, let's move into how do we rid our lives of fear? And the truth is, you can't. Fear is adaptive, and it's important. It's actually really helpful for our survival. But you can manage the fears that aren't helping you. The ones that are getting in the way, making you a people pleaser, making you so afraid of failure you're in a job or a life you don't like. And here's how we do that. Number 1, become more aware of the ways it shows up for you. Meaning, how is it presenting in your life? I gave you a couple examples, things to look out for, some red flags and things like that, like different rules, feeling resentful, right? Being easily agitated. Notice. That'll help us recognize when we're acting out of a fear versus acting out of our true selves. My next tip is to play it out. Do worst case scenario, best case scenario, most likely scenario. Sometimes just playing that out takes away that big, intense fear, and it can allow us to make a better decision. Also, plan possible solutions if it doesn't go as we'd hoped, right? We hope for the best, we prepare for the worst. So what could we do if we try to act in that different way? It doesn't go well. And then keep your goals in mind. It helps keep us motivated. Like for me, it reminds me that, I don't like who I am when I'm people pleasing. So I don't want to do that. That's my goal. I want to like who I am. It's a slow process, but we'll get there. We have to be patient because change takes time and it feels uncomfortable. I think that's a key piece that I want to leave you with as we talk about making this change and how difficult it can be, is that just because we're not acting out of fear doesn't mean that the thing we're going to do is going to feel great, it's going to be easy and be super comfortable. I wish I could say that. I wish I could say, you're going to act in a different way and it's going to go great. But I will promise you this, that if we choose to act in a different way, we'll get a different outcome. And we won't keep getting what we got, right? Like when I people please, I don't like who I am. And then I cultivate relationships I don't want to be in. It's bad, right? So if I don't like that outcome, I'm going to act differently. And at least I'll get a different outcome. And I can kind of hone how I want to act and how I want to respond till I get the response or the outcome that I'm truly seeking. but it's going to take time. So be patient with yourself. I wish I could say, oh, we can get rid of fear. It'll be poof, it's gone. But fear keeps us safe, right? Our brain is wired to seek out threats in our environment so that we're safe, so that we continue on, so that we survive and thrive. But sometimes it gets in the way. And as a thank you, I want you all to know there are downloadable worksheets. You can click the link in the description. We've created these for you. If you enjoyed this and some of the exercises, there's more work to be done. Sometimes it helps me to have some guidance when I'm trying to do this personal work. So check out those worksheets. You can download them, print them, use them in any way that you want in your own process, but I hope that they're helpful. And I would love to hear your thoughts. What are some of your common fears? Let's share those, because I swear to God, just saying out loud my own fears and my own concerns and the things that I'm struggling with just takes a little bit of their power away, and it's at least moving us in the right direction. So feel free to share down below. I love you all. Have a wonderful rest of your week. I'll see you next time.